Deathwing is probably the most fun hero I've covered so far, and I think he pretty successfully captures the whole raid boss idea while managing to be pretty reasonable to balance and play around. His gameplay is focused on being the biggest thing in the fight, both model and abilities-wise. Deathwing's trait gives him armor based on his health, but it works a little differently than directly related to the current percentage. Instead, he starts at 4 plates at max health, each one giving 10 armor, and every 25% health loss will remove a plate until he heals from his flight ability. He doesn't use mana, which I think is generally fine, and the spells being spammable helps the raid boss fantasy all in all. The more impressive and inherently understandable part of the trait is that he's always unstoppable and deals 100% bonus damage to heroes with spells. Oh, what's that? I didn't give enough weight to that? Yeah, so like he can't get caught out like ever. It is nearly impossible to misplay his positioning, aside from vision being excluded from this game. He is an extremely strong choice when up against pick-centered compositions, and since he's so big, he can effectively tank all skill shots while he's fighting. Though to balance this enormous upside, he cannot be affected by allies' abilities at all, meaning no armor, no healing, no displacement, or anything else. His talents for the plates, though, are pretty boring, and all early levels. Molten Blood gives him a small regen while he retains most of his plates, which is helpful when his flight is on cooldown. Draconic Might heals on basics and gives him Protected when he loses a plate, which is very helpful if he has both targets to basic attack and is up against heavy burst damage compositions. Might can feel a bit broken when you're on the other side and playing someone that really needs the burst, especially when it's based on health percentages like Multi-L or Greymane. The next talent is Dragon's Ire, which boosts his overall damage by 25% when he's at 3 or less plates, which, if I reword that as if he has not flown since dropping below 75% HP, you should see the use in taking it. Well, now that I think about it, Elementium Plating is a 16 talent that only affects plates, which is an active ability that grants a shield, regen while the shield is active, and then gives back plates if his health is above the plate thresholds. His flight ability, which I referenced earlier, is what he does in place of a mount. After a 3-second delay, Deathwing takes to the sky and can land anywhere his team has vision. He also regenerates health steadily while in the air. His level 7 talents all relate to either his flight or landing to be a little more interactive. Firestorm makes the landing come with a bunch of meteors that all reduce the cooldown of his flight if they land on opposing heroes. Skyfall gives a new ability while he's airborne, letting him drop meteors that heal him for 3% maximum health, and Death Drop makes his landing reduce the spell armor of opponents he lands on, as well as letting him use abilities sooner. Wait, why does this say it's 2 abilities? That's because Deathwing has 2 stances. He's either in Destroyer or Worldbreaker form while he's on the ground. He can also change the form by activating his additional ability, and it has a 20-second cooldown, though he will always retain his Q regardless of which form he's in. Speaking of, his Q is a huge windup of 1.5 seconds, and then starts breathing fire in a massive zone, dealing damage every 1/8 of a second. It also drains 30 energy a second while active, and he can't move at all while channeling. The effectiveness is somewhat reliant on the targets that he's trying to hit, as well as the terrain that the opponents have to work around to avoid it. He can also cast the ability in Fog of War or in a bush to avoid being visible for the wind-up duration, making it harder to avoid. It's really the only ability that actually drains the energy resource, so try not to hold it too long unless it's really working. As for talents for this ability, Infernus increases damage by at least 25% constantly, or by 75% when done at high energy. I will note that he doesn't have an ability that costs more than 25 energy, so he can combo one ability into the windup and still get maximum payout for this. Wicked Inferno helps with the heavy cost of this ability, reducing the energy drain of Q by 10 per second, and increasing energy regen for a few seconds after it ends. This talent is required for his Q build, since he can fight for much longer and use his other abilities frequently while still being able to hold a Q for a while when the time comes. Conflagration is a huge payoff for a well-executed Q by adding a burning effect to anyone who takes enough damage from a single Q cast, and they explode in a small AoE while burning, potentially increasing the damage by a ridiculously high amount in a claustrophobic situation. From here I'll talk about Destroyer, then Worldbreaker forms in that order to keep it as coherent as possible. Destroyer W is a small windup, then deals small damage in a large AoE around him. It's a short cooldown, but not usually worth the cost since he could be basic attacking instead, unless he's hitting like 4 or 5 heroes at the same time. But the talents aren't so bad for giving it a use, kinda. Dragon Soul allows Deathwing to heal from W, which still probably needs to be hitting multiple heroes or he'll just lose that same amount of health from the wind-up time. Heat Wave, though, gives Deathwing a damage over time aura, which stacks 4 times. So if he hits 4 heroes in one cast, he doesn't need to use the ability again in the fight. Destroyer E is a small dash that deals low damage and slows all opponents' hit, and has bonus damage at the end point of the dash. Also a pretty short cooldown and not bad mobility for a hero of this size. The only talent for this ability, Ruination, is a stronger slow to opponents hit by the bonus damage on the dash, which is not very worthwhile, especially compared to the other level 13 talents. Now on to Worldbreaker. W is a moderate range AoE on the ground that does an amount of damage when it pops, and then a small damage over time and slow while opponents remain in the circle. Dragon Soul similarly lets Deathwing heal from this W, but only on the explosion. And Heat Wave only increases the damage of the explosion, which goes from to It's an ability mostly used for the utility of a slow in the long-lasting AoE, and casting on fleeing opponents to catch them, or to cast Q. Worldbreaker E has a 1-second startup, and then sends out 2 line skill shots that stun all opponents hit for 0.75 seconds. Probably the most immediately useful ability in his kit, being a long-range hard crowd control ability, and it kinda has a long cooldown to compensate. Ruination also benefits this ability much more than Destroyer's E, reducing the cooldown and mana cost. His ultimate, or at least the ability on his R key, is already unlocked at the start of the game, but is put on a 4.5 minute cooldown at the start, and then is a pretty normal ultimate from then on. It's a long-range dash that leaves behind Scorched Earth, dealing good damage over time. But at level 10, he can get a talent that refreshes the cooldown on the takedown of enemy forts and keeps, while also increasing the damage of the ability as well, or he can get another ultimate ability that functions like his Destroyer W, but with even less damage and a long fear to all opposing heroes hit. The fear is good crowd control, but since it has a noticeable windup, is fairly inconsistent against anyone but immobile mages and heroes, diving Deathwing in particular. At level 20, he can only enhance Cataclysm by adding a slow and increasing the duration. It's pretty alright for contesting large areas. Man, I don't know. It's underwhelming for an ultimate of a raid boss. The Storm talents are kinda just fine and don't offer some huge power spike that completes the vision of the one-man army. Anyway, there are barely any talents I haven't covered, the strongest of which is Fire and Fury, giving increased damage on basic attacks and, most importantly, reducing the cooldowns of his abilities. And it's not that hard to get crowd control on targets, even if Deathwing is fighting alone like he wants. That's kinda it for this hero, though. Unfortunately, there aren't a lot of reasons to switch between stances in-game. The goal is to usually stay in one or the other based on talent choices and the opposing hero team composition. But he's not so bad, since he can always fight back regardless of how many opposing heroes are in a fight, and can even help his team, even if it's just a byproduct of being so big and hard to fight. All in all, this character is possibly busted, but the fact that he becomes easier to kill the more you kill him makes him easy to focus and burst down if he's in a bad spot or if he's holding Q. So be a raid boss, but don't let them hit you too much.